Let's continue our look at the complete career of The Undertaker, and let's pick up where we left off at WrestleMania 20. Now, this period of The Undertaker's career is quite varied. The dead man would work with a lot of different Smackdown superstars, and his rivalries weren't all that deep nor storied, so all we can really do is look at Taker's pay-per-view matches as they happened, and make mention of any notable TV matches and moments. After WrestleMania 20, The Undertaker moved on to new feuds and rivalries with a range of different opponents, and the first man in line to challenge the dead man was Booker T. Booker had been recently drafted to SmackDown, yet in storyline, he didn't want to be on the blue brand. Booker felt he should be on Raw. While bragging about how he was the biggest star in the minor leagues of SmackDown, Booker was interrupted by the sound of the gong on the April 22nd, 2004 episode of SmackDown. It looked like The Undertaker was coming after Booker T. The 5-time WCW champion ran away in fear, but there was no avoiding the dead man. After Booker T defeated Billy Gunn the following week, The Undertaker showed up to confront Booker. This was Taker's first appearance since WrestleMania 20, and the audience went nuts when Taker walked out with Paul Bearer again by his side. After weighing up his options, a concerned Booker T decided the best thing to do was to grab the urn from Paul Bearer and smash it into The Undertaker's head. As Booker raised the urn in victory, The Undertaker sat up, and Booker T once again ran away in fear as the Phenom looked on. Taker had his first televised match since WrestleMania on the May 6, 2004 episode of SmackDown, when the Phenom defeated the FBI in a 2-on-1 match. Taker vs Booker was penciled in for the Judgment Day 2004 pay-per-view, and while the Phenom was taking care of Nunzio and Johnny the Bull on SmackDown, Booker T was trying to gain any advantage he could over his Judgment Day opponent. We saw footage of Booker visiting a voodoo witch doctor, and Booker was advised to get some help from the other side. The lady gave Booker a crow's feather, the nails from a condemned man's coffin, and the fangs from a 3-legged dog. Booker T needed one more ingredient to complete his potion. He needed dirt from a grave, and the dirt had to be taken from a grave that had no name. Later on in the broadcast, we saw Booker in the graveyard. He found the grave with no name, and after Booker took the dirt, we saw The Undertaker's hand rising from the grave. The following week, Booker T claimed to now have the power to defeat The Undertaker in his hands, but this didn't stop the dead man sending a message to Booker T. The Undertaker's face appeared on the screens before Paul Bearer walked into the arena, and as Booker T froze up on the entranceway, The Undertaker emerged from the ring. The segment ended with Booker T pointing to his little bag of black magic. We would have to wait until Judgment Day to see if Booker really did hold the key to defeating The Undertaker. Booker T's hands were shaking as he held out his voodoo concoction at Judgment Day 2004. Booker placed the pouch at the corner of the ring as his match with The Undertaker began. I'll spare you the details here. The black magic done absolutely nothing to hurt The Undertaker, nothing at all. Booker T throws the contents of the pouch into The Undertaker's eyes, but Taker completely no-sold it, and it makes you wonder why the WWE went through all the trouble of centering this story around Booker T finding a possible edge over The Undertaker. The dead man picked up the victory with the Tombstone Piledriver, and just like that, Booker's plans to end The Undertaker had failed. The build up to Judgment Day wasn't bad at all, the payoff was just a little disappointing. Paul Heyman had been firing up the Dudley Boys on SmackDown. Heyman had told Bubba Ray and Devon that even though the Dudleys had been successful, they weren't headlining any pay-per-views, and they weren't making any main event money. Paul challenged the Dudleys to find a victim on the May 27th episode of SmackDown and, quote, make an impact, and towards the end of the broadcast, the Dudleys found their victim. Paul was thrown into a car as the Dudley Boys drove off into the night, only this wasn't Paul Heyman who the Dudley Boys kidnapped, it was Paul Bearer. The Undertaker had another match with Booker T on the June 3rd episode of SmackDown, and just as The Undertaker was about to deliver the tombstone, Paul Heyman showed up on the stage. Heyman walked down to the ring to confront the dead man, and The Undertaker didn't give Heyman a chance to speak, instantly grabbing Paul by the throat. The Dudley Boys appeared on the screens. Bubba Ray and Devon said that no harm would come to Paul Bearer if The Undertaker listened to Paul Heyman for a moment, and Paul then gave The Undertaker a decision to make. The dead man had 1 week to decide if he would align himself with Paul Heyman. If The Undertaker refused, then who knows what would happen to his old manager. The segment ended with Heyman saying that it's actually he who now has The Undertaker by the throat, and he wasn't wrong either. The next week on Smackdown, The Undertaker felt he had no other choice but to join Paul Heyman, and so Paul E had himself a new instrument of destruction. Heyman wanted to test the loyalty of his new acquisition, and so a match was booked for the Great American Bash, The Undertaker versus the Dudley Boys. Heyman expected The Undertaker to lay down for the Dudleys at the pay-per-view, and to ensure Undertaker would do the right thing, Paul Bearer would be placed inside a glass crypt, and every time The Undertaker doesn't do the right thing at the Great American Bash, cement would get poured into the crypt. If The Undertaker ended up defeating Bubba Ray and Devon, then Paul Bearer would probably get buried alive within the crypt. It definitely sounded intriguing for sure. Paul Heyman even gave us a demonstration on Smackdown by filling up a casket with cement. So at the Great American Bash, Paul Bearer sat in his gimmicked glass crypt as the Dudley Boys and The Undertaker made their way to the ring. Paul Heyman stood beside the cement truck while holding up the urn, and fans wondered what The Undertaker would do here. Would Taker fully align himself with Paul Heyman by following his orders, or would The Undertaker manage to find a way out? Heyman gave the audience a little taste of what was to come by putting a little cement into the crypt, and Bubba Ray Dudley told The Undertaker to do the right thing and lay down. We thought the Phenom was about to follow orders, but Taker grabbed Bubba by the throat and the match got underway. Heyman would remind Taker throughout the match that he wasn't doing the right thing, stopping the action momentarily to fill the crypt up with more and more cement. Paul Bearer was confident that The Undertaker would save him, while the SmackDown commentary team wondered how The Undertaker was going to get out of this predicament. In the end, The Undertaker won the match with the tombstone, and when Paul Heyman threatened to fill up the crypt for the last time, a lightning bolt stopped Heyman in his tracks. The Undertaker then shocked everyone by grabbing a microphone and telling Paul Bearer that he has no other choice. Paul must rest in peace, and The Undertaker himself buried Paul alive inside the glass crypt. The Undertaker would reveal that Paul Bearer was a liability that the dead man had no use for. Paul Heyman would ask for The Undertaker's forgiveness before introducing SmackDown audiences to his latest acquisition, none other than Heidenreich. From here, The Undertaker would begin an unsuccessful campaign for the WWE Championship. JBL had just become the king of SmackDown. Fans of the blue brand wanted to see JBL get dethroned by the dead man, and so a rivalry began between the two men. It's quite telling though that really none of the JBL vs Undertaker matches of this era were all that memorable. Maybe the No Mercy Last Ride match will stick with some fans, but by and large, I personally feel that this rivalry was one of the Undertaker's weakest. The first JBL vs Undertaker match took place at Summerslam 2004. The build up to this WWE Championship match centered around JBL trying to prove that he wasn't afraid of The Undertaker, even ridiculing the dead man by introducing audiences to a little version of the Phenom. The finish to the SummerSlam match was a bit of a letdown. Orlando Jordan, an associate of JBL, hit the ring to attack The Undertaker with the title belt. The Undertaker ended up taking the belt away from Jordan before using it as a weapon against JBL. The referee saw what The Undertaker had just done, and Taker got disqualified. After the bell had rung, The Undertaker continued his attack, eventually leading to JBL getting chokeslammed through the roof of his white limousine. JBL showed up on the next episode of SmackDown wearing a rather unique neck brace, and the WWE Champion announced that The Undertaker will not get another shot at the championship. The Undertaker made an appearance and JBL got out of dodge. The dead man grabbed the WWE Championship belt that JBL left behind, sending a clear message that the Phenom's quest for the WWE title wasn't over yet. The following week, JBL threatened to sue Teddy Long for providing an unsafe working environment, and JBL wanted to know what Teddy Long was going to do about The Undertaker. Teddy said that JBL can resolve his issues with The Undertaker in a championship match in the main event. JBL argued that he was in no condition to defend the title, and so Orlando Jordan was forced to defend the WWE Championship on JBL's behalf. Taker had the match won, but JBL pulled the referee out of the ring. Orlando got DQ'd, and so JBL kept the championship. The Undertaker ripped JBL's neck brace off and a huge chokeslam was delivered to the WWE Champion. This all led to Teddy Long announcing that The Undertaker will indeed get another WWE Championship match against JBL, a last ride match at the No Mercy pay-per-view. To win this match, you have to place your opponent inside a hearse and the vehicle had to drive out of the arena, so another gimmick match for The Undertaker here on pay-per-view. I should mention that JBL tried to use members of The Undertaker's old Ministry of Darkness to try and gain an advantage, but Taker easily took care of old associates Viscera and Gangrel. Taker also put Orlando Jordan onto The Undertaker's symbol for a good old-fashioned sacrifice. The match at No Mercy was way more physical than the Summerslam encounter, and it wasn't a bad main event at all. JBL takes an absolute beating, and there's a great blade job if that's your thing, but again, it's another JBL versus Taker match that's kinda ruined by the finish. The last ride match was seemingly made for The Undertaker, and I remember thinking that Taker was 100% leaving this pay-per-view as the new WWE Champion, but Heidenreich showed up to cost The Undertaker the match. Heidenreich was hiding inside the hearse. The Undertaker tried to fight back, and he even got out of the vehicle after getting put under with ether, but the numbers game was too much and JBL ended up winning the match. Before the pay-per-view went off the air, the hearse with The Undertaker inside got rammed by Heidenreich, but when the hearse was opened up, there was no Undertaker. The Undertaker vs Heidenreich feud is definitely a rivalry that many people would prefer to forget, and I really don't blame them. Watching this stuff back to create this upload was painful at times, as World Wrestling Entertainment tried to build a new main eventer who just didn't have what it took to headline big shows. The Undertaker deserves credit for going through with it, but at the same time, Taker had just gotten out of a questionable feud with JBL, and here he was now getting involved with an unproven newcomer in Heidenreich. The Phenom defeated Heidenreich at the 2004 Survivor Series, and Taker got another shot at the WWE Championship at the Armageddon pay-per-view, this time in a fatal four-way that also included champion JBL, Eddie Guerrero and Booker T, and Heidenreich once again cost The Undertaker the WWE Championship. JBL successfully defended his title here, and so Heidenreich vs The Undertaker was booked once again for the next pay-per-view, the 2005 Royal Rumble. This was a casket match, by the way, and The Undertaker was able to place Heidenreich in the casket and put an end to this feud. I should also mention that Kane helped Taker during this match when Snitsky interfered on behalf of Heidenreich. There's not a lot more I can say here, and I do apologise to fans who maybe enjoy Taker's work with Heidenreich, but to me it felt like The Undertaker was punching down, and with WrestleMania just around the corner, it felt like the WWE had no real clue about what to do with one of their biggest legends. Thankfully, a certain legend killer had plans for the dead man. Randy Orton had left Evolution, but his babyface turn wasn't going so well. Randy was so cocky and so brash at the time, and fans had a hard time warming up to the legend killer. The difference between Randy and Heidenreich, though, was that Orton was quite simply dripping with charisma and talent. He had proven himself with matches against the likes of Mick Foley, Shawn Michaels and Chris Benoit, and his former association with Evolution had helped launch Randy into the main event picture. Orton had found success with his legend killer gimmick. Basically, Orton would destroy legends of the WWE to prove that he was the future of the wrestling business, and he was quite successful in beating and humiliating the superstars of yesterday. The biggest legend of them all was The Undertaker and The Undertaker's WrestleMania winning streak, and it made an incredible amount of sense for Randy to go after the dead man on the WWE's biggest stage. I'll be honest, I thought this was really it for The Undertaker's streak. I felt that there was an incredible upside to Orton achieving the impossible. He was so young and he had a whole career in front of him, and still to this day, out of all the opponents The Undertaker faced at WrestleMania, I still feel that the one guy who should have been considered to do the impossible was Randy Orton. Orton was still trying to be a babyface when he challenged The Undertaker to a match at WrestleMania. Inspired by superstar Billy Graham, who encouraged Randy to go where no wrestler had gone before, Randy challenged The Undertaker to a legend versus legend killer match on the March 7th, 2005 edition of Raw. The Undertaker agreed, and a contract signing was held on the March 17th episode of Smackdown that also featured Teddy Long and Eric Bischoff. Remember that the legend versus legend killer match would be an interpromotion bout. The Undertaker signed the contract right away, but Randy grabbed the microphone. Orton said he respects The Undertaker and he respects The Undertaker's legacy, but the Legend Killer says that The Undertaker will soon be 12-1 at WrestleMania. Orton says that he's not like The Undertaker's previous WrestleMania opponents because Randy isn't afraid of the dead man, and the segment ended with Orton slapping The Undertaker across the face. Taker made the lights in the arena go haywire, and Randy Orton ran away from his WrestleMania 21 opponent to end one of the WWE's better contract signings. To completely turn Orton back into a heel, the Legend Killer went back to Raw and he dropped his girlfriend Stacy Keibler with an RKO. And then on the final episode of SmackDown before WrestleMania, Cowboy Bob Orton set up The Undertaker, allowing the Legend Killer to deliver the RKO to the dead man. And so the table was set for another Undertaker match at WrestleMania, April 3rd, 2005, WrestleMania 21, Legend versus Legend Killer. I thought this match was fantastic and both men deserve a ton of credit. Orton didn't slow down just because he was in the ring with The Undertaker, and the Phenom had no issues keeping up with a much younger and faster opponent. Orton versus Taker just turned out really good. Orton played the cocky Legend Killer who wouldn't admit that he maybe bit off a bit more than he could chew here. He just didn't show any fear at all against the Phenom, and The Undertaker used his experience to outsmart the youngster on more than one occasion. There's an incredible spot where Randy reverses the chokeslam with an RKO. The audience is really taken by surprise with this counter, and even though it's been surpassed in terms of reversals that end with an RKO, it was still amazing to see back in 2005. In the end, it was Randy's cockiness that got him defeated, just the way it should be. Orton signaled for the tombstone. Randy was going to kill the legend with his very own move, but Undertaker reversed it with a tombstone of his own. 1, 2, 3, and The Undertaker is 13-0 at WrestleMania. Check this one out for sure though. If you haven't seen Taker versus Orton at WrestleMania 21, then you're in for a surprising treat. This is one match I'd like to cover more in depth in the future. This is where we'll end today's video then. The Undertaker took a 2-month break after WrestleMania 21, and when he returned, his rivalries with JBL and Randy Orton would resume. There's also the stuff with Muhammad Hassan, and rather than going over all of this again, I'd recommend checking out my Hassan video if you haven't already, just to get prepared for the next Undertaker upload. The next year of The Undertaker's career was pretty much another run without the WWE Championship, but the dead man did face a variety of different opponents, and we'll explore all of this very soon in the next Career of The Undertaker video. As always, thank you for watching.